Okay, so I've left it for a couple of minutes, and what I'm going to do is tilt my board, and when the sheen of the water starts to disappear from the surface of your painting, this is when you can start to play with effects a little bit. So all I'm going to do is create a little bloom on top of his head. So I've just added a little bit of clean water to my clean brush, and I just want to pop down a few spots of water just on this blue here, and it will create a nice bloom effect. You won't sort of see the full effect until it's dried, so just trust me that that's what happens. So what we need to do now is fully allow that section to dry, and so while we're allowing that to dry, we don't want to paint up to it in any area, as that will disturb this that we've just painted. When you place water or paint down on the paper, it wants to spread into other wet areas, so we need to move away from that area. And what we're going to do next is work on the tail just down here. So I'm going to move my painting across so that you can see it better, and I'm just going to use the same blue from my palette that we had for his head. Okay, I'm just going to, with my larger brush, I'm going to wet it first. So I'm only wetting the top tail feather, and carefully applying it. So I don't want a great big puddle, I just want to dampen that paper down so that when we apply the blue in a second, it will spread nicely for us. Okay, so I just reactivated this blue in my palette. It started to dry, so I've added a little bit more water. We only want it very pale anyway to begin with on the tail here. So I've just loaded my brush with the blue paint, and I'm going to apply that to this damp tail feather. It comes right up to a point, so just nice and slowly apply the paint nice and evenly across the surface, and push that paint down towards the end of that feather. Okay, while that's wet, I'm just going to come into my paint with a damp tip and just pick up a little bit of the pigment straight off the block, and I'm going to touch it to the tip of this feather and allow it to spread up a little bit, because it's slightly darker on the tip. So this is a great time to do that. So just dabbing it on and then moving it around slowly, just springing it up. You can also, let's get a little bit more, you can also, actually looking at the reference, it is darker along this edge here, so we can come up with our brush and it creates that soft darker edge. Okay, and it's slightly darker as well, coming towards this top section here. So I'm just following the shapes that I can see and the shadows and darker areas on that top feather there. So again, we have to let this area dry now. We couldn't paint this feather next to it because it would disturb that paint. So we have to allow this one to dry before we do that. While that tail feather is drying, we can work on part of this wing here. So I clean off my brush and we're going to use the grey. I'm just going to take a little bit across here because I don't want a lot on my brush. I'm just painting something with a lot of detail now. So if I bring in the reference, I'm going to start at the top here. There's a white triangular or arrow shape here below the green, and the part I'm painting is the black triangle or arrow shape beneath that. So this is the white shape here. I'm going to paint the shape below it. So it's a tiny, tiny shape, so we can work wet on dry paper, and then that shape carries on to this side of the wing. I've got a lot of paint on my brush, so just dab it off with a paper towel and use the paint that's already on the paper. Just move that paint around that's already there. So I'm just dragging it up to that top section where it meets the green. And then there's actually a little area I'm just working out now, just below here with this grey too, so I'm just adding that bit. And tidy up those edges, make sure you've got nice sharp crisp lines there because that's quite important on the bird. These are really striking details. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint the stripe, the darker stripe below. So you miss one out because that's white, and paint the next one down. Again, there's no need really to wet the paper because it's such a small shape that you can fill that in really without too much trouble, without getting any hard lines. Straight down to the end here. And just filling that in. Again, go back along the edges just to crisp those up. I'm going to continue in the same way, just following from this last shape I did. There's a very, very fine slither of a triangle just underneath that one in the grey. So just take your time on these small, delicate areas. I'm only using the very tip of my brush so that it's quite a point there, and I'm able to get much more accurate with that. So then the next shape starts at the top. And comes all the way down. Don't put too much paint on your brush because it's very, very fine line, and if you flood the paper, even though it's dry, the paper's dry, your little puddle of paint will want to spread out and you'll end up losing those white lines in between these black stripes. So just be careful not to put too much paint on your brush at a time. So I've just done that one, and I'm going to move on to the next one along. So let's just check my reference image, make sure I'm painting the correct bit. So there's this one just in here. I have simplified my stripes a little bit, so I haven't got every single stripe that's on the side of the bird, just because it's impossible with a brush of this size to paint such small stripes. If you have a really, really fine detailed brush, then you'd have more chance of being able to do that. But I know you guys are limited with your materials, so I'm just making it a little bit easier for us. Just there. And I'm going to paint this edge here, leaving a gap. Just take your time with this. Has dried, and I can shift my work again for you and paint in the other tail feather. So I'm just wetting that lovely Prussian blue in my palette there. It's just off screen actually. So there's my palette, and I'm just going to wet the tail feather first. So remember, just a little bit of water on your brush. Get in the nooks and crannies with the very tip of your clean, damp brush. Fill out that whole area. Just notice that there are a couple of feathers behind these two, so it doesn't go all the way down to the end. Making sure that I've not left any dried parts of the paper in that shape, and I can go ahead and start painting with the blue. So I'm starting under the wing here and dragging that blue paint down to the bottom. Just bring the paint slowly to the edge. And then, like we did before, I'm just going to pick up some of that blue, just straight from the actual palette itself, so that it's darker on my brush, and I'm going to come into the top of the tail underneath the wing there and darken that area. And drag that down. It's actually dark all the way along again, along that edge. So while the paper's damp, you can apply a little bit of this darker blue. It's not darker, it's just there's more pigment on your brush. So it's the same paint, it's the same coloured paint, it's the Prussian blue, but it's more concentrated because I've lifted it straight from the hard pan, so therefore, you know, it's not mixed with as much water, so it's darker. And there's also a darker section just here on the top of that feather. So just come in with a little bit more paint and darken that up. nicely like that, and then we'll allow that to dry.